The rain poured heavily that November night in Seattle, turning the city streets into rivers of reflected neon lights. It was nearly midnight when Michael Jean pushed open the door of Ruby's diner, his expensive suit soaked despite the short walk from his parked car. The small bell above the door chimed softly, announcing his arrival to the nearly empty restaurant. The warmth inside hit him immediately, along with the comforting smell of coffee and freshly baked apple pie. Michael hadn't planned to stop here. In fact, he hadn't planned anything beyond escaping his office after another soul-crushing day. His tech company, worth billions on paper, felt more like a prison these days than the dream he'd built from scratch. He chose a quiet booth in the corner, away from the handful of truck drivers and late-night workers scattered around the diner. The worn leather seat squeaked as he sat down, and he noticed a small tear in the vinyl, something that would have bothered him a few years ago. Now, it just felt real, unlike the perfect, sterile environments he usually found himself in. A young waitress approached his table, her nameplate reading Rose. She carried a coffee pot in one hand and had a warm smile that reached her eyes, not the practiced, professional kind he was used to seeing in high-end restaurants. "Rough night?" she asked, already pouring him a cup of coffee without waiting for his order. There was something genuine in her voice that made Michael look up properly for the first time since entering. "You could say that," he replied, surprising himself by actually wanting to talk. Rose had a certain presence about her, down to earth and real, with slightly messy hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and a small coffee stain on her apron. She moved with the confidence of someone comfortable in their own skin, something Michael hadn't felt in years. "Well, our coffee isn't fancy, but it's honest," she said with a light laugh. "And if you're hungry, the meatloaf is pretty good tonight. My mom's recipe. I convinced the cook to try it." Michael found himself ordering the meatloaf, even though he usually stuck to carefully measured portions of organic, chef-prepared meals. As Rose walked away, he pulled out his phone out of habit, then stopped himself. Instead, he watched the life flowing through the diner, a young couple sharing a slice of pie, an elderly man reading a worn paperback, a taxi driver grabbing a quick meal between shifts. When Rose brought his food, the aroma hit him first. It wasn't elegantly plated like the meals at his usual restaurants, but it looked like something that could actually make someone feel better. "Rough night for me too," Rose mentioned as she set down his plate. "My car broke down this morning, had to take 3 buses to get here. But hey, at least it's not raining in here, right?" Her positivity wasn't the fake kind that his motivational speakers and life coaches try to teach. It was resilient, born from facing real challenges and choosing to keep going anyway. Michael found himself asking about her car troubles, and before he knew it, they were having a real conversation. He learned that Rose was working 2 jobs, here at the diner and at a local bookstore during the day. She was taking online classes in computer science, fitting study time between shifts and during her lunch breaks. When she talked about her dreams of working in cybersecurity, her eyes lit up with the same passion Michael remembered having when he started his company. "Most people think I'm crazy," she said, refilling his coffee cup for the 3rd time. "A waitress wanting to work in tech. But you know what? My daughter thinks I'm a superhero for going after what I want. That's all that matters to me." As the night went on, Michael realized he'd stayed at the diner for over 2 hours, the longest he'd spent anywhere besides his office or home in months. His phone had buzzed countless times, but for once, he didn't feel the urgent need to check it. Instead, he found himself fully present in this moment, in this simple diner with its chipped coffee cups and honest conversations. When it was time to leave, Michael left a generous tip, but money wasn't what made this night significant. For the first time in years, he felt something shift inside him. A crack in the walls he'd built around himself. Rose had shown him something he'd forgotten. That real connections don't come from business deals or networking events, but from genuine moments of humanity. As he stepped back into the rain, Michael knew he would return to Ruby's diner. Not because of the food, though the meatloaf had been surprisingly good, but because in this unlikely place, he'd caught a glimpse of what he'd been missing in his billion-dollar world: authenticity, resilience, and the simple courage to be real. Little did he know, this rainy night was just the beginning of a story that would change not only his life, but the lives of many others. Sometimes the biggest transformations start in the smallest moments, with something as simple as a cup of coffee and a genuine smile. 2 weeks had passed since that rainy night at Ruby's dinner, and Michael Jean's world was crumbling around him. He sat in his corner office on the 47th floor, staring at the emergency alerts flooding his screen. His tech company, Jean Innovations, had just suffered the worst cybersecurity breach in its history. Millions of users' data was at risk, and the company's stock was in free fall. The morning had started like any other: endless meetings, coffee that had gone cold, and the familiar weight of responsibility on his shoulders. Then came the first warning sign: customer complaints about strange account activities. Within hours, it had snowballed into a full-blown crisis. His team of experts, hired from the most prestigious tech companies in the world, scrambled to contain the damage, but they seemed to be fighting a losing battle. Michael's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Board members demanded explanations, journalists wanted statements, and angry investors threatened legal action. His assistant had already rescheduled 3 media interviews and a board meeting, but the pressure kept mounting. The pristine office that usually felt like his sanctuary now seemed more like a glass cage, with the Seattle skyline watching his every move. As evening approached, the fluorescent lights of his office began to hurt his eyes. The same thoughts kept circling in his head. How had they missed this? What could he have done differently? The security team had assured him their systems were unbreakable. They'd spent millions on the best protection money could buy, yet here they were, watching years of work and trust disappear in a matter of hours. Without really thinking about it, Michael found himself driving through the rain again, away from the downtown chaos. His fingers gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. He needed something. Not another expert's opinion or another crisis management strategy. Just something real. The familiar bell of Ruby's diner chimed as he pushed open the door. The same comfort of coffee and cooking food welcomed him, but this time it couldn't quite calm the storm in his mind. He slumped into the same corner booth, his designer suit wrinkled from the long day, his tie loosened and crooked. Rose was there again, and something in her expression changed when she saw him. Without a word, she poured him a cup of coffee and, to his surprise, slid into the seat across from him. The diner was quiet, just a few regulars at the counter. "You look like you're carrying the weight of the world," she said simply, no pity in her voice, just understanding. Maybe it was the gentleness in her tone, or maybe it was just that he'd reached his breaking point, but Michael found himself talking, really talking. Not the careful, measured words he used in press releases or board meetings, but the raw truth about his fears, his company, the breach, and the overwhelming feeling that he was watching his life's work slip through his fingers. Rose listened without interrupting, occasionally refilling his coffee cup. When he finally fell silent, she was quiet for a moment, thinking. "You know," she said slowly, "in my cybersecurity classes, we've been studying something similar. It's interesting because sometimes the biggest vulnerabilities aren't in the fancy security systems." What started as a casual observation turned into a 2-hour conversation. Rose pulled out her laptop, an old model held together with stickers, and showed him some of her course materials. She explained things not in the complex technical terms his experts used, but in practical, real-world examples that actually made sense. "It's like leaving your house," she explained, drawing on a paper napkin. "You can have the most expensive security system in the world, but if the back door is unlocked because everyone assumes someone else checked it." She shrugged, and Michael felt something click in his mind. As Rose talked about her perspectives on cybersecurity, shaped by real-life experiences and fresh eyes on old problems, Michael found himself taking notes on another napkin. Her approach was different from his experts. While they focused on complex systems and theoretical threats, she thought about human behavior, everyday habits, and the simple gaps that often got overlooked. The crisis wasn't solved that night, but for the first time since it began, Michael felt like he could breathe again. He had something he hadn't had before, a new way of looking at the problem. As he watched Rose explain another concept using salt and pepper shakers as visual aids, he realized something else too. Sometimes the best insights don't come from the most expensive consultants or the most advanced systems, but from people who see things differently. When he finally left the diner that night, his phone was still buzzing with crisis alerts, but his mind was clearer. He had a plan forming, not just for handling the immediate crisis, but for preventing the next one. And maybe, just maybe, he found someone who could help make it happen. What Michael didn't know yet was that this crisis, as terrible as it seemed, would lead to changes he never could have predicted. Sometimes life's biggest breakthroughs come disguised as breakdowns, and the help we need often comes from the most unexpected places. The real question was, would he be brave enough to take a chance on an unconventional solution? The next morning, Michael stood before his company's board of directors, his heart pounding but his voice steady. The mahogany conference table stretched before him like a runway, each face around it a mask of skepticism and concern. He was about to propose something that would either save his company or make him look completely crazy. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "I want to introduce you to our new security consultant." He gestured to the door, and Rose walked in. She wore a simple black blazer over a blue blouse, borrowed from her cousin for this meeting, and carried her trusty laptop covered in stickers. The board members exchanged glances, their confusion evident in their raised eyebrows and slight frowns. "Mr. Zhang," interrupted Mr. Chen, the oldest board member, his voice sharp with disbelief. "We have a crisis on our hands. Our stock has dropped 30%, and you want us to trust our company's future to a diner waitress." Rose stood straight, her chin held high. The same quiet confidence that she showed while handling difficult customers at the diner now radiated through the boardroom. "Actually," she said, opening her laptop, "I'd like to show you something I discovered last night." Over the next 30 minutes, Rose walked them through her analysis. She'd stayed up until dawn, reviewing the company's security protocols from a fresh perspective. Using simple analogies and clear examples, she explained vulnerabilities that the expensive security firms had missed. She compared the company's current system to a house where everyone was so focused on installing high-tech locks that they'd forgotten to check if the windows were closed. "The problem isn't just technical," she explained, using a whiteboard to sketch out her ideas. "It's about understanding how real people actually use these systems. Your employees are taking shortcuts because the security protocols are too complicated. They're like people who use password 123 because the requirement for 3 capital letters, 2 symbols, and a prime number is too hard to remember." A few board members chuckled at this, their rigid postures beginning to relax. Rose continued, pointing out specific examples she'd noticed just from studying the publicly available information about their systems. Her practical, down-to-earth approach started to make perfect sense even to the most skeptical listeners. As she talked, Michael watched the room transform. The tension began to dissolve, replaced by genuine interest. Even Mr. Chen was leaning forward, his earlier skepticism giving way to thoughtful nods. Rose's passion for the subject was infectious, and her unique perspective, combining her cybersecurity studies with real-world experience, offered solutions that no one had considered before. "We've been thinking about this all wrong," she concluded. "We don't just need better technology. We need systems that work with human nature, not against it. Security that's both strong and simple enough that people will actually use it properly." The silence that followed was broken by Mr. Chen himself. "Mr. Zhang," he said slowly, "I believe we should hear more about these proposals." Other board members nodded in agreement, and Michael felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Over the next few weeks, Rose split her time between the diner and the office. She insisted on keeping her waitressing job. To stay grounded, she explained to Michael. During the day, she worked with the security team, bringing her fresh perspective to their sophisticated systems. Her presence in the office was like a breath of fresh air, breaking down complex problems into simple, solvable pieces. The changes she suggested weren't just technical. She noticed how the cleaning staff propped doors open while working, creating security risks. She saw how the complicated login systems led people to write passwords on sticky notes. Each observation led to practical solutions that actually worked in the real world. 1 month after the breach, the company's new security protocols were in place. The stock price had stabilized, and customer trust was slowly rebuilding. Rose's improvements had not only fixed the immediate problems, but had created a system that was actually stronger than before. She had a way of explaining technical concepts that made everyone feel smart rather than intimidated. The workplace culture began to shift too. Rose's habit of treating everyone with equal respect, from the CEO to the janitor, started to spread. She brought in homemade cookies to team meetings, sharing her mother's recipe and creating an atmosphere where people felt comfortable asking questions and admitting when they didn't understand something. Michael found himself looking forward to their daily meetings, not just for the progress they were making, but for the way Rose approached each challenge with optimism and practical wisdom. She had a gift for finding simple solutions to complex problems, often drawing from her experiences managing difficult customers or balancing her busy schedule. "You know what's funny?" she told him one evening as they reviewed the day's progress. "Everyone keeps talking about how I'm helping the company, but honestly, this opportunity has changed my life too. I'm finally getting to use what I've learned in a real way, and my daughter gets to see that hard work and believing in yourself really can lead to amazing things." As Michael watched her explain a new security feature to the team, using the office coffee maker as a practical example, he realized that sometimes the best partnerships aren't just about skills or experience. They're about bringing different perspectives together, about having the courage to look past titles and appearances to see the real potential in people. The story of the waitress who helped save a billion-dollar company started making its way through the tech industry. But for Michael and Rose, it wasn't about the headlines or the success. It was about something more important, the reminder that real innovation often comes from unexpected places, and that sometimes the best qualification isn't a fancy degree or a prestigious title, but the ability to see things differently and the courage to speak up. The autumn leaves were turning golden when Michael realized how much his life had changed over the past 6 months. He stood in his kitchen, actually cooking dinner for himself, something that would have seemed impossible half a year ago. The smell of garlic and herbs filled the air as he followed the recipe Rose had taught him, his expensive suit jacket draped over a chair and his sleeves rolled up. His phone buzzed with work messages, but for the first time in years, they didn't seem urgent. He'd learned something valuable from Rose. Not everything needed an immediate response. Sometimes the most important things in life happened away from screens and boardrooms. Earlier that day, he'd done something that surprised his entire office. He'd left work at 5 p.m. to attend his nephew's school play. The old Michael would have sent an expensive gift and an apology. But watching his nephew's face light up when he spotted his uncle in the audience made Michael realize how many precious moments he'd missed while chasing success. Rose's influence had spread far beyond the company's security systems. She had this way of asking simple questions that made him think differently about everything. "Why do you eat dinner at your desk?" she asked one day. "The food's not going anywhere, and neither is the work." Such a simple observation, but it had started him thinking about all the habits he'd formed over the years. Meanwhile, Rose's life was transforming too. She still worked a few shifts at Ruby's Diner. "To keep myself grounded," she'd explain with a laugh. But her world had expanded in ways she'd never imagined. Her daughter, Lily, now had her own study space in their new apartment, complete with a proper desk for homework. The days of studying at the kitchen counter were behind them. One evening, Michael stopped by the diner during her shift, something that had become a comfortable routine. He watched as she balanced serving customers with explaining a complex coding concept to another waitress who'd expressed interest in tech. That was pure Rose. Always sharing knowledge, always lifting others up along with her. "You know what's funny?" she said, sliding into the booth across from him during her break. "Last week, Lily's teacher asked what her mom did for a living. She told the whole class I was a cybersecurity superhero who also makes the best pancakes in Seattle." Her eyes crinkled with pride and amusement. 2 years ago, I was just trying to figure out how to pay for online classes. Now I'm helping design security systems for one of the biggest tech companies in the world. Life is pretty amazing sometimes. The changes weren't always easy. Michael had to learn to slow down, to appreciate moments instead of always rushing to the next goal. He started having Sunday dinners with his parents, something he hadn't done since college. His mother nearly fainted when he offered to help cook using one of Rose's recipes. Rose faced her own challenges. Some of the executive team still looked down on her, despite her proven expertise. But she handled their prejudice with the same grace she'd used with difficult customers at the diner. "Their doubt is their problem, not mine," she'd say with a shrug. Her confidence inspired other employees to speak up more, to share their ideas regardless of their position or background. One rainy evening, similar to the night they first met, they found themselves sharing a pie at Ruby's diner after a long day at the office. Michael had just finished telling Rose about finally reconnecting with his younger brother after years of distance. "It's strange," he said, stirring his coffee thoughtfully. "I spent years thinking success meant having the biggest office, the most impressive title, the highest stock price. But lately, I've realized success feels different than I thought it would." Rose nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Success is being able to help my daughter with her homework without checking the time every 5 minutes, worried about getting to my next shift," she said. "It's seeing her believe that she can do anything she sets her mind to, because she watched her mom do it." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Rose's daughter Lily, bouncing through the diner's door after her art class. She carried a drawing she'd made, a colorful portrait of her mother in both a waitress uniform and a superhero cape. The pure joy and pride in Rose's face as she hugged her daughter made Michael smile, remembering how rarely he used to do that. As he watched Rose help Lily with her homework at the counter, explaining fractions using sugar packets as visual aids, Michael reflected on how much they'd both grown. He'd learned to value relationships over achievements, to find joy in simple moments. Rose had gained confidence in her abilities and was helping others believe in themselves too. The biggest transformation, though, was in how they saw the world. Rose had shown him that success wasn't about the height of your office building, but the depth of your impact on others. And he had helped her see that dreams weren't just wishful thinking. With hard work and courage, they could become reality. That evening, as the diner's regulars came and went, and the coffee kept flowing, Michael realized something important. Sometimes the best changes in life don't come from careful planning or strategic decisions. They come from being open to new perspectives, from letting someone else's wisdom and kindness transform your world, one small moment at a time. The morning started with a phone call that made Rose's hands shake. She stood in her small kitchen, staring at the newspaper on her counter. There it was, splashed across the business section: "Billionaire's new love interest, gold digger or genius." The article was filled with speculation about her relationship with Michael, twisting their friendship into something ugly and calculating. She hadn't even finished her first cup of coffee when her phone started buzzing with messages from people she hadn't heard from in years. Former classmates, old neighbors, even her high school teacher, everyone suddenly had an opinion about her life. The quiet, peaceful world she built was cracking under the weight of public scrutiny. At the office, whispers followed her down the hallways. She caught snippets of conversations that stopped abruptly when she walked by. The same people who had praised her ideas just weeks ago now looked at her with suspicion. It was like being back in high school, but worse. This time, her career and her daughter's stability were at stake. "Mom, why are there people with cameras outside my school?" Lily asked that afternoon, her small face worried. Rose's heart sank. She tried to shield her daughter from all of this, but the media circus was getting out of control. Reporters had somehow gotten wind of their story, and they were hungry for drama. Michael was facing his own battles in the corporate world. The board members who had previously supported Rose's initiatives were now questioning everything. "It's inappropriate," they said. "It looks unprofessional." Some even suggested that their whole relationship had been a carefully planned scheme to infiltrate the company. During a particularly tense board meeting, one member bluntly asked, "How do we know she's not selling company secrets to competitors?" The accusation hung in the air like poison. Michael's face turned red with anger, but before he could respond, his phone buzzed with an urgent message. Rose's ex-husband had gone to the media. The story hit the internet like wildfire. Headlines screamed about custody battles and gold-digging mothers. Rose's ex-husband, who hadn't paid child support in years, was now claiming he deserved full custody of Lily because Rose's lifestyle changes were unstable. He painted himself as a concerned father, conveniently forgetting the years of absence and broken promises. That evening, Rose sat in her favorite booth at Ruby's diner, where everything had started. Her former co-workers tried to shield her from the curious stares of customers who recognized her from the news. Her phone kept buzzing, more reporters, more old acquaintances trying to get the inside scoop, more lawyers offering their services. "Maybe this was all a mistake," she whispered when Michael found her there. He looked as exhausted as she felt, his usual confident posture replaced by worried shoulders. I never wanted any of this. I just wanted to do good work and make a better life for Lily. The weight of public opinion was crushing them both. Michael's business partners were questioning his judgment. Some clients were threatening to pull their contracts, concerned about the company's stability. The simple, beautiful connection they had built was being twisted into tabloid fodder. I could step down, Rose offered, her voice barely steady. Go back to just working at the diner. It would be simpler. The words hurt coming out, but she was ready to sacrifice everything she built to protect her daughter from this chaos. Michael sat there for a long moment, staring at his coffee. The same cup of coffee that had started this whole journey. Finally, he looked up, and there was a determination in his eyes that Rose hadn't seen before. You know what's interesting? He said slowly. When I was just the lonely billionaire workaholic, nobody questioned my judgment. I could make million-dollar decisions without anyone batting an eye. But the moment I started becoming human, started valuing relationships, started seeing worth in places others overlooked, suddenly everyone thinks I've lost my mind. He reached across the table and took her hand. It wasn't a romantic gesture, it was a gesture of solidarity, a friendship forged in adversity. We've done nothing wrong, he continued. We built something real, something that's helped not just the company, but dozens of employees who've been inspired to share their ideas. Are we going to let fear and prejudice destroy that? Rose thought about Lily, about the example she wanted to set for her daughter. Would she teach her to run from difficulties, or to stand strong in her truth? The answer became clear, even though the path ahead looked daunting. Just then, one of the regular diner customers, an elderly woman who'd been coming there for 20 years, walked up to their table. You know, she said, placing a gentle hand on Rose's shoulder, I've been watching you two for months, and all I see is two good people who brought out the best in each other. Don't let them take that away from you. The simple wisdom of those words cut through all the noise and drama. Rose and Michael looked at each other, really looked, and saw past the headlines and accusations to what was real. They had built something valuable, not just for themselves, but for everyone around them. It wasn't about romance or money or power. It was about two people who helped each other grow, who proved that true connections can cross any boundary. The road ahead would be challenging. There would be legal battles to fight, prejudices to overcome, and trust to rebuild. But sitting there in that familiar diner, surrounded by the smell of coffee and the quiet support of people who knew the real story, they made a decision. They wouldn't let fear win. They wouldn't let others' judgments define their story. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Michael's office as he and Rose prepared for what might be the most important presentation of their lives. They weren't just fighting for their professional reputations anymore. They were standing up for something bigger than themselves. Ready? Michael asked, watching Rose adjust her simple blue blazer. She'd chosen to wear it instead of the expensive designer suit his assistant had suggested. This is who I am, she'd said firmly. If they're going to believe in me, they need to see the real person. The conference room was packed. Board members, major shareholders, media representatives, and employees filled every seat. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. But instead of hiding from the spotlight, they decided to face it head-on. Thank you all for coming, Rose began, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. We've heard a lot of stories about us lately. Today, we want to share the real one. She clicked to the first slide, showing a picture of Ruby's diner at night. As she spoke, the room's atmosphere began to shift. She shared the story of her journey, not just the glossy version the media had twisted, but the real one. The late nights studying while her daughter slept, the bus rides between jobs, the dreams that seemed impossible but wouldn't let her go. Michael stepped forward to talk about the company's transformation. He showed real data, improved security metrics, increased employee satisfaction, and innovative solutions that had come from encouraging ideas from all levels of the company. Success isn't just about having the most expensive solutions, he explained. It's about having the right perspective. Then came the surprise. They invited several employees to share their stories. A janitor talked about how Rose had helped him enroll in coding classes after noticing his interest in computers. A receptionist shared how the company's new mentorship program, inspired by Rose's journey, had helped her daughter pursue her dreams of becoming an engineer. We're not just defending our relationship, Rose explained, her voice growing stronger. We're standing up for the idea that talent and dedication can come from anywhere. That someone's background doesn't define their potential. The presentation shifted to their new initiative, a foundation dedicated to supporting working parents pursuing education in technology. Every person in this room knows someone who gave up on their dreams because life got in the way, Michael said. We want to change that story. As they outlined the foundation's plans, Rose noticed tears in the eyes of several board members. These weren't just wealthy investors anymore. They were parents, grandparents, people who had their own stories of struggle and success. Lily, Rose's daughter, had asked to speak too. Standing brave in her school uniform, she talked about watching her mom study late at night, about how proud she was to tell her friends that her mother helped protect people's computers. My mom showed me that it's never too late to follow your dreams, she said, her clear voice reaching every corner of the room. The media coverage began to shift. Instead of scandal, they focused on impact. Stories emerged about other companies implementing similar mentorship programs. Rose's example inspired other businesses to look beyond traditional credentials to see potential in unexpected places. One evening, as they sat in their usual booth at Ruby's Diner celebrating the success of their presentation, an old couple approached their table. "We've been reading about you," the elderly woman said. "Our granddaughter was ready to quit college because she couldn't afford it while working. Your story convinced her to keep going." These moments kept happening. People would stop them on the street, not for autographs or gossip, but to share how their story had affected them. A single dad pursuing his degree. A warehouse worker learning coding on lunch breaks. Each story reminded them why they'd chosen to stand their ground. The company culture transformed too. The rigid hierarchy began to dissolve, replaced by an environment where good ideas were valued regardless of their source. The security team now included former retail workers, veterans, and parents returning to the workforce, all bringing unique perspectives to problem solving. Rose kept her regular Thursday night shift at the diner, now using it as an informal mentoring session for others hoping to break into tech. Michael often joined her, having learned that some of the best business insights came from conversations over coffee and pie. Their story became about more than just a billionaire and a waitress. It became about challenging assumptions, about seeing people for their potential rather than their past. It became about courage, the courage to stand up for what you believe in, to be authentic in a world that often demands conformity. One rainy evening, similar to the night they first met, Michael watched Rose teaching a young waiter about basic coding on her laptop. "You know what's amazing?" he said when she joined in for coffee. "We started by trying to save my company from a crisis, but we ended up changing how people see themselves and their possibilities." Rose smiled, the same warm smile that had first caught his attention that stormy night. "Sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest moments of courage," she replied. "Like being willing to see someone for who they really are, not just what they seem to be." Outside, the city lights twinkled in the rain, and inside Ruby's Diner, dreams continued to take shape over cups of coffee and shared stories of hope. They had stood together, faced the storm, and emerged stronger, not just for themselves, but for all the others who needed to believe that their dreams were possible too. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, a rare perfect day in Seattle. Ruby's Diner had been transformed, but not in the way most people would expect for a billionaire's wedding. The familiar neon sign still glowed, the booths were still worn and comfortable, and the coffee still came in the same chipped mugs, exactly the way they wanted it. "Are you sure about this?" Michael's mother had asked when they announced their plans to get married at the diner. "We could book any venue in the world." But Michael and Rose knew this was right. This wasn't just a restaurant, it was where their story began, where real life had brought them together. The diner's regular customers had been invited alongside corporate executives and board members. Old Mrs. Thompson, who'd been coming for breakfast every day for 30 years, sat in her usual booth, now decorated with white flowers. Next to her was one of the company's biggest investors, both of them sharing stories over coffee. Lily, now wearing a pretty blue dress, helped the diner's longtime waitress Betty arrange flowers on the counter. The young girl had grown so much over the past year, not just in height but in confidence. "My mom's marrying her best friend today," she told anyone who would listen, her face glowing with joy. Rose got ready in the diner's back office, transformed for the day with strings of soft lights. She'd chosen a simple but elegant dress, nothing too fancy. "I want to look like myself," she'd said while choosing it. Her old work apron hung on the door. She'd insisted on keeping it there as a reminder of where her journey had begun. Michael waited by the counter where he'd first sat that rainy night, now wearing a suit that probably cost more than the diner's monthly revenue. But his warmest accessory was his smile, real, unguarded, nothing like the polished business expressions he'd worn in his old life. The ceremony itself was simple and heartfelt. Instead of a traditional wedding march, Rose walked down the aisle, really just the space between the booths, to the gentle hum of the diner's coffee machines and the soft music from the old jukebox. Their vows weren't just promises to each other, they were acknowledgments of the journey they'd shared. "I promise to never forget that the most valuable things in life can't be bought," Michael said, his voice thick with emotion. "You taught me that success isn't measured by the height of your office building, but by the depth of your impact on others' lives." Rose's vows brought tears to everyone's eyes. "I promise to keep believing in possibilities," she said, holding Michael's hands. "You didn't just believe in my dreams, you showed me that helping others achieve their dreams is the greatest success of all." Lily stood between them, holding their rings on a small cushion she'd decorated herself. When the time came to exchange rings, she hugged them both, creating a moment that had photographers crying behind their cameras. This wasn't just a wedding, it was the beginning of a new family. The reception that followed broke every rule of high society weddings. Instead of fancy catering, they served the diner's famous meatloaf and apple pie. The wedding cake was displayed right next to the daily specials board, which now read, "Today's special, a love story." Dancing took place between the tables, with the jukebox playing everything from old love songs to current hits. The sight of corporate executives dancing alongside diner staff, all barriers broken down by joy and celebration, was something no one would soon forget. During the reception, Rose and Michael announced the official launch of their foundation, the New Chapter Initiative. Its mission was simple but powerful, to support people who dared to dream beyond their current circumstances. The foundation would provide scholarships, mentorship, and support to working parents pursuing education in technology. "This foundation isn't just about giving money," Rose explained to the gathered guests. "It's about giving hope, about showing people that it's never too late to start a new chapter in your life." The first recipients of the foundation's support were there at the wedding, 3 single parents who'd been inspired by Rose's story to pursue their own dreams in tech. They'd already started their classes, supported by scholarships and mentorship programs. As evening fell, the diner's neon sign cast a warm glow over the celebration. Michael and Rose shared a quiet moment in their favorite booth, now decorated with white flowers and twinkling lights. "You know," Michael said, "a year ago, I thought I had everything figured out. Big office, successful company, all the trappings of success. But I was just existing, not living." Rose squeezed his hand. "And I thought I was just a waitress with impossible dreams," she replied. "Funny how life surprises you when you're brave enough to be yourself." Lily bounded over to their booth, her face glowing with happiness. "Mom, Michael, come on, they're about to serve the pie." The 3 of them laughed together, a family built on love, respect, and the courage to see past surface appearances to what really matters. As they rejoined their guests, the mix of people celebrating with them told its own story. Company executives chatting with diner regulars, former skeptics now firm believers in their vision, young dreamers inspired by their journey. Their wedding wasn't just a celebration of their love, it was a testament to the power of seeing the extraordinary in ordinary moments. The night ended with a tradition Rose insisted on keeping. She and Michael served coffee to all their guests, wearing their wedding clothes and sharing smiles with everyone. Because at heart, their story wasn't about a billionaire and a waitress finding love. It was about 2 people who dared to be real in a world of appearances, who chose to value authenticity over expectations, and who proved that the greatest love stories don't need fancy settings. They just need honest hearts and the courage to believe in something bigger than themselves.